Since I was a little boy, 6 or 7 years old, I read books about the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. I've always been just enamored with that stuff and history, and I became a history teacher too, so that kind of goes along with that. But one of the things that I've learned by reading about different battles and wars is that element of confusion that takes place in a war. There is so much in a battle, there's such a big part of it is confusion. Sometimes there has been instances where the enemy was not able to tell who the enemy was. You have probably heard about that in the Vietnam War, where they were not able to detect where the enemy was. It was very non-traditional. They used guerrilla-type warfare, and it was the tactics they used were very difficult to overcome. That has happened also in the Middle East over the last few years, in Afghanistan and in Iraq and these different places. It's a different kind of war. They fought war or battles where it was house to house, and it's very dangerous. And the big element of that is confusion. Not being able to tell who is the enemy and who is not the enemy. Open your Bibles to the book of Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, and you see that what Jesus is doing in this mission discourse. We come now to the last part of the mission discourse. He had just finished telling you that there were three main reasons why you should not fear. The last one was because you're more valuable than the sparrows. You are of much value, and so there is not a need to fear because God knows the very hairs on your head. He values you. He's going to take care of you. He is a caring God. And now He's going to talk about, and as He brings this home, He is going to begin to talk about what does a true disciple look like? What does a true disciple going to experience? What is the life of a disciple? What can they expect? And so as they go, one of the main things he says here is there should be a distinction between you and the world. Follow along with me as I read beginning at verse 32. Matthew chapter 10, verse 32. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it. And he who loses his life for my sake will find it. He who receives you receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. Now it came to pass when Jesus finished commanding His 12 disciples that He departed from there to teach and to preach in their cities. In the verses that we have just read, we see that now we can go into this next stage of Jesus' instructions. Notice there in verse 1 of chapter 11, it says, now when He had finished commanding His disciples. We don't know anything that what happened to the disciples. We're not told about the success of the mission. All we are told is what Jesus wanted to tell them before they left. So everything that you've heard is something that we take in and we just internalize it and we apply it to our lives. And what He is saying here in the last part, He is telling them what they can expect. How are they supposed to react? He's already told them, and I don't have to tell you again, but just for review, they are going into a hostile world. And so as they go into a hostile world, they can expect persecution. But then what should I do? I should not fear. But then how am I going to react? If I'm not going to fear, what else can I expect? And the first thing he tells us here in verses 32 and 33 is that a true disciple will openly confess Jesus. That's the first thing you can write down this morning. A true disciple. There should be a distinction among people. If the distinction is not there, if a person professes Jesus and it's a blurry distinction between a lost person and a saved person, I'm here to tell you today, there is a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Jesus is talking all about distinctions here. He's talking about how a true disciple will emulate Him. A true disciple will display these kind of characteristics. And the first thing he says is that a true disciple will openly confess Him. Notice what it says. It's very hard language here, isn't it? He says in verse 32, he says, therefore whoever confesses me, I'm reminded here that whosoever will may come. Whosoever will, the invitation of believing in Jesus and the shed blood on the cross of Jesus goes to whosoever will. And Jesus reminds of us that right here, and He says, whosoever. Hey, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's you. It doesn't matter if it's another person. Whoever confesses me, notice what He says, before men, him I also will confess before my Father who is in heaven. There's two things that you need to know. Verse 32 and 33 are parallel, but there's two things that you need to know. First of all, it matters what you say about Jesus. And ultimately, the second thing is it matters what Jesus says about you. It's that simple. It's that straightforward. It matters what you say about Jesus. It matters what you give off about Jesus. When people come to you, do they know that you're a Christian? Is it evident that you're a Christian? Can they look at your life and say, you know what, I don't like them, they're different, but I can tell you this, they follow Jesus. It's not a matter of if they approve of your life, but do they know that you follow Jesus? Do they know that you have professed Jesus as Lord? He's talking about here, about that very thing, about being Lord. He's talking, it's not just that you say, well, you know, Jesus was a great man, Jesus was a great teacher. It comes down to the fact that you believe that Jesus is who He says He is, and everyone around you knows what you believe about Jesus. We just got done talking about fear, didn't we? Don't be fearful. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be shy. I'm going to tell you, where does this happen? It happens at work. It happens at school. It happens in your neighborhood. It happens with it is a real, this is not theory. This is rubber meets the road application. It's in your everyday life. What do people know about how you feel about Jesus? So number one, it matters what you say about Jesus. More importantly, it doesn't stop there, does it? It matters what Jesus says about you. Notice in verse 32 here, he says, him will I also confess before my Father who is in heaven. Did you know that you don't have the last word about your relationship to God? Jesus has the last word. The picture could be like this. We know that He's our intercessor. We know that He is like our defense attorney, and He stands before God constantly making atonement for you. And He says, they are covered by my blood. But it's also a final word that Jesus has. He says, him will I also confess before God who is in heaven. When Jesus makes His testimony, that is the testimony that God is listening to. What Jesus says about you makes all the difference. It is the final word. It doesn't matter what I say about you. It doesn't matter what someone else says about you. It doesn't matter what the world says about you. What matters is, what does Jesus say about you? Well, after hearing that, our ears should be perking up a little, right? We should be tuned in just a little bit more stringently, right? We're going to turn it up now. Now, what is Jesus going to say? Notice what He says. He says a parallel statement in verse 33. He says, but whoever denies me before men. Well, now He's saying the opposite. He's saying, whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father is in heaven. So He's saying the same thing, but He's giving the other side of the coin. So those who are going to deny me, or those who are going to renounce Jesus, those are going to say that Jesus is a great man, but He's not the Son of God. The people that will say things like that, then Jesus will say, I will deny you before the Father who is in heaven. So what you say matters about Jesus. Dear friend, and I have failed at times, and I know you failed at times. Don't ever pass up the opportunity to express your profession of faith to others. Following our evening service tonight, we're going to have one that's going to come forward and give a profession of their faith. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Take advantage of those opportunities with your friends and your family and your neighbors and your workplace at school. Don't be afraid to tell others how you feel about Jesus. Don't give in to that fear. We talked about it this morning. The women in Egypt, they were not afraid to do the right thing. And what happened? God blessed them. God will bless you too. Notice the next thing here in verses 34 through 36 about what a true disciple can expect. The true disciple can expect to see division. They will see division. They won't necessarily be the cause of division. And I think that's a very important distinction. But they will see and they will experience division in their life as a true disciple. Notice what Jesus says. He gives us some more hard words, doesn't He? He says, do not think. Don't ever let it enter your mind, is another way of saying it. Do not begin to think. Do not let it enter your mind. Do not have this kind of perspective. He says, do not have this kind of perspective that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Jesus is bringing the kingdom of God near. Let me help you understand what's happening here. Is we have on this earth that is filled with sin and it is cursed. And then Jesus is bringing the kingdom to this earth. Let me tell you, there's going to be tension. There's going to be conflict. There is a contradiction. I said it a while ago and I will say it again. If there is not a distinction between your life and the life of a lost person, if there is blurriness there is a problem spiritually in your life. You could be just disobedient. You could be lost. I don't know. But there should be a distinction. The same goes for the kingdom of God. The kingdom of this earth, where it's the prince and the power of the air, Satan this is where he is, his domain, and he is living here, and this earth is cursed by the sin curse. And then the kingdom comes to this earth, there is going to be conflict. Notice what he says here. Do not think that I came to bring peace. Let me tell you what He came to bring. He came to bring the kingdom, and it's going to be consummated, and it's going to be set up on this earth. And there is going to be conflict. There is going to be a battle, and Jesus is going to win. Notice what it says. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves mother or father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Notice that there in 34 through 36, he's talking about those who are set at variance at one another. What Jesus is telling the disciples and those who are sent out and us today is that don't be surprised when even the very core of our families are affected by the kingdom. The kingdom is coming, and it may even affect our closest relationships. It's not what Jesus wants necessarily. He's telling you the result of the coming of the kingdom. You want to talk about peace for a minute? The shed blood of Jesus brings peace between you and God. But what He's talking about here is what you will find on earth. You will find sin, and you will find things that are at variance with the kingdom of God. You will find Satan and his evil spirit influencing humanity, and there is going to be conflict that will even affect the very most simple relationships. There will be divisions in households. By the way, he's quoting there in verses 35 and 36, a fulfillment of Micah chapter 7 and verse 6. Micah had prophesied about this, about how households would be divided, and Jesus is saying, this is what's happening as I am ushering in the kingdom. But notice there in 37, I read the verse a while ago. It says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. This word here, worthy, it has in it the idea of being deserved. That's probably the best definition of this word and how he's using it. He's saying, if you don't love me more than anything else, you don't deserve me. What can a disciple, what is their disposition? What is the expectation of a disciple? Well, they're expected to love Jesus over everything else, even your own family relationships. The extent at which you love Jesus matters. What you say about Jesus matters. Notice what he does here in verse 38. So I'm going to place Christ over my family connections. But also in 38, he gives us these very critical words here and very challenging words. He says, and he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings in this room. I promise you, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings that's watching online. But there has been some too soft words regarding this verse. Jesus is not just talking about, and it is okay if you use it in this sense, but I want you to understand it's not limited to the sense that a cross is a burden in your life. It goes well beyond a burden in your life. You know what I'm talking about. Someone will be expressing to you a burden in their life. And then someone will say, well, I guess that's your cross to bear. You've heard that. That is true. I'm not saying it's not true. What I'm saying is the challenge that Jesus is giving goes beyond just an ordinary burden of life. He is challenging you all the way to submitting your whole life to Him. What was a cross? It was what Jesus died on. A cross was an instrument of death. It was what you would bear the crossbeam and you would walk and you would be driven to the pole and they would nail your crossbeam to the pole and you would be hung there until you died. This is not just some ordinary nuisance in your life. I've got possums in my gardens. That's my garden. I've got a cross to bear. That's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about a little backache or some person in your life that afflicts you with they tease you at work. They do things to you. Your neighbor, he won't fix his fence. That's not the burden. That's not your cross that he's talking about. You know, you can tell when I'm being a little facetious. That's not what he's talking about. Don't be soft about this. Understand, he's talking about an instrument of death. Are you willing, I know this is harsh words in our culture today, are you willing to give your life for the cause of Christ? That's what he's saying. He's not doing this soft talk. He's not doing this weak stuff about little nuisances of life. He's talking about, are you willing to go all the way with Jesus? What's all the way? It means giving your life. It means being ready to die, just like Jesus gave His own life. Are you willing to die? A true disciple is going to be willing to submit their life for the cause of Christ. Notice there again, he who does not take his instrument of death, his death sentence, and follow after me. What does he say? He says, he is not deserving of me. It makes us kind of go back and reassess things a little bit, doesn't it? It kind of makes us stand back and reevaluate, what do I say about Jesus? And am I saying about Jesus that I am willing to give my life for the cause of Christ? How much do you believe in the cause of Christ? Are you willing to give your life? Jesus says if you're not willing to give your life, you are not worthy, you do not deserve Him. The third thing He says is that they will find and they will lose. We're talking about the difference between heaven and hell. He says that he who finds his life will lose it. When I look at my life, it is work, and it is materialism, and it is having nice things in my life. It's having nice clothes and shoes. It's being able to buy houses and cars and all of these things. He who finds his life. When I realize that everything that I enjoyed, the pleasures of life, then I realize that this is not what it's all about. But then I find Jesus and I realize that life is not about those other things. Those things. My life must be oriented to Jesus. Look at it again, what it says. He says, he who finds his life will lose it. I am dead to those things. I am surrendering those things up. God may bless you in your life, but that's not what my life is about. My life is about Jesus and only Jesus. It doesn't mean that you're broke, busted, and you're a pauper and you're a beggar now and you can't have those things. But what is important to you, it must be Jesus. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to say it again at the very end of the message. I got to say it now. You got to go all the way with Jesus. If you don't go all the way, then tell me, how can you square it up with what Jesus is saying? And at what point is it adequate to go with Jesus? Jesus says, you got to be willing to go all the way with me, or you're not deserving of me. Your entire life. And he who loses his life for my sake will find it. I've given up all these other things, but I've got Jesus. Jesus means everything to me. Jesus first. These other things can wait. These other things are not important. That's not what it's all about. Notice in these last 3 or 4 verses, verses 40, 41, and 42, is that the true disciple will experience unity with Jesus and His sent ones. You will experience unity with Jesus. Oh, look at these words. He says, he who receives you receives me. He's talking to His disciples, and they're going to be received differently by different people. Remember what He said. He says, come to a city and bring peace. Put your peace on that house. If they reject you, take your peace away, shake the dust off of your feet, and move on to the next house. There's going to be some who will receive you and some who will not. Now He's saying this, he who receives you, welcomes you in, wants to hear the message about Christ, wants to hear the plan of salvation from God, who makes you a part of them and embraces the message. Guess what they have done? They have also received Jesus. It matters what we do with the message. There's no room in this for despising a messenger of God. I promise you, if he came from God, if the message they're bearing came from God, you're treating that message bearer, and you can be a message bearer too.
You know you are supposed to be a light bearer. And when people receive you, they're treating you like they treat Jesus. You see that? Look at it again. Verse 40. He who receives you receives me. How you treat the light bearer, the message bearer, is a reflection of how you feel about Jesus. You say, well, it's just something else. Now, no, it's not something else. It's a problem that you have with God. He who receives you receives me. But notice the second part of it. He says, and. Jesus has got more to say about this. And he who receives me, and that's Jesus, receives Him who sent me. There's no room for rejecting the message, rejecting the light bearer, not receiving the light bearer, and receiving Christ. You can't do it. You can't separate them. Jesus is working through His light bearers. Well, the same thing, God is working through Jesus. How you feel about Jesus is a reflection of how you feel about God. It's all connected. God's people. There's unity there, isn't there? There's a oneness there. There's a oneness between God, His Son, and His people. There's not factionalism. There's not division. There's not preferential. I get to decide how I treat this person and this person I'm going to discriminate against. I do not like them, but I love Jesus. None of that. None of that in this message. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives Him who sent me. Oneness. Unity. It all goes together. Notice in verse 41 and 42, he's going to talk about rewards here. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward, and he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones, did you notice the three groups that Jesus is talking about? He's talking about the prophet, He's talking about the righteous person, and He's talking about the little ones. They may be one and the same, but Jesus is giving us a comprehensive look at everything, isn't He? He's saying one who comes directly from God, if you receive Him, you will receive a reward for receiving Him. And the second one is the righteous person. Those who receives a righteous person will receive a righteous reward. Those will be given at the end. At the end of your life, you will be given a reward on how you treat others. I don't find any room. I don't find any room for despising God's people. I don't find that God's people would do that. I mean, it seems I'm getting blurry. It's getting blurry, isn't it? When so-called God's people will treat other God's people in a way that is inappropriate. It's starting to get blurry here. Dear friend, I'm going to say it again. There should be a distinction. There should be clarity. You should not wonder, why is this person treating God's people like this? Jesus says that in verse 41, that he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. Notice in 42, and whoever gives one of these little ones, these insignificant ones, these weak and vulnerable ones. I got a great email from across the street, and they quoted that verse. And as you know, we're not preaching this message because of that, but he put it in his email. New Haven has truly given these little ones a cup of water. They received those water bottles. It was a blessing when I read that. You can do this in your everyday life. When you look at the weak and the vulnerable, when you look at the ones whose society just scorns and pushes off to the side, they do not matter. Jesus says, he who gives help, He who gives assistance, He who exercises compassion on these little ones, I'm going to tell you, you'll not find in the kingdom those who are not compassionate. Jesus was compassionate. Those who are hard and those who are, they're mean. They are intolerant. They are ugly. You won't find them in the kingdom. They won't be there. They will not be there. Jesus is giving you the description here of who is in the kingdom. It's the compassionate ones. It's the ones who receives a righteous man. It's the one who receives a prophet. It's the one who receives the one who sent him. Those are in the kingdom. That is the mark of a true disciple. Notice how he ends here in verse 1. He says that when he made an end of commanding this was the instruction, this was what he sent them away with. This was what he had to tell them. I'm going to tell you, it matters what Jesus says, right? It matters what Jesus says. We need to listen to what he's saying. It says that after he got done commanding them, that he went on into the next town and he continued to teach and preach. We're not told. You know, our curiosity would like to know, well, what happened? How did it go? What's important is not how it went. What's important is what was said by Jesus. I'm going to ask all of you all to stand, our musicians to come. We'll prepare for a song of invitation. I want to leave you with just this one, just challenging, short challenge. What is the distinction? What makes the difference? How can you tell a true disciple from a pseudo-disciple? This is it. Jesus has to be first in your life. Number one in your life as we sing.